Awesome. Here we go. So, welcome back to Interp. We are picking up where we left off last Monday with kind of kicking things off with our participants. And this is kind of irrespective of content, and it's also irrespective of modality. So, we have a couple of different sort of groups or families of ways that we can structure or scaffold or framework our interactions with our participants. And the two big clusters on this are going to be, first, staffed interpretation, where you are either kind of out in front leading or at least facilitating, or in some cases just kind of part of the team. Or non-staffed interpretation, where we have a whole bunch of printed materials, electronic interactive materials. If you've ever seen a video on loop in a visitor center, that's non-staffed interpretation, typically, unless it's regulatory or management stuff. That's much less common in visitor-facing applications. And it can be things that are a little bit less straightforwardly identifiable as environmental or historic cultural interpretation. Things like comic books, or board games, or things of that nature. So how many of you guys and gals, show of hands, have ever been through a visitor center? Probably all of us. Yeah, me too. Lots of them. How many of you guys and gals have seen a gift shop? Yeah, me too. Okay. Typically, those gift shops are not just branded shirts for Mammoth Cave or Ozark Scenic Riverways or something like that. It is also a whole bunch of what we might sort of naively call things like science toys. You know what I'm talking about? Or educational puzzles, or if it's just a Yeti coffee mug, at least it's got sort of a laser cut vinyl of, a map of the site or something like that. And this is, as mercenary as it may seem, absolutely a valid and indeed an important part of environmental interpretation in terms of content delivery. So with things that are available either for free or for sale in a non-staffed way, this is kind of a force multiplier in one sense of when you're on site with somebody, you've got anywhere from several seconds to establish contact up to a couple of hours, in that rare long-form cave tour or something like that. But for something that a family takes home and they pull out that board game in 2 months, that is, for our education folks in the room, that's spaced repetition. That's one of the highest effectiveness ways to convey meaning about something, to enhance retention about something, to enable or uplift critical or deeper thinking about the thing. And yeah, it might just be kind of a silly kids board game about dinosaurs or whatever, but that's how a lot of paleontologists get started, right? They fall in love with the thing first, and then they can spend a lifetime going through college and grad school and writing research grants to go be the next, was it Ian Grant in the original Jurassic Park, right? So, all that to say, we have non-staffed and staffed interpretation modalities. You'd think of a modality as a delivery vehicle. Content, really kind of the same, right? It doesn't change the phenomenon, the people group, the historic event, whatever your topic is, that you're trying to interpret and connect with your participants. But it does help you sort of get that across to them and bring communication and information back from your audience or participants, as the case may be, as well in some cases. So we've got staffed interp, non-staffed. And it is same content either way. Typically, the the staffed and non-staffed interpretation also follows generally the same sequence or approach in moving from sort of the beginning of what you are hoping to get across through the conclusion of it. And for that, we typically put together, at least for the purposes of this class, it's going to be a rule. But it's a rule that you can absolutely break with gleeful abandon once you are a professional interpreter and you have sort of the seasoning, the experience, the perspective to know when it's wise to break rules. Okay? So for that, across both of these modalities, we're going to use a 5-part outline. The most important chunk or the most important observation out of this is that it is not a script. You're not having to be a book writer or a screenwriter or a playwright to be an effective interpreter. In fact, you generally want to stay away from a script as much as you possibly can for the following reason. When some early researchers looking at sort of the professional practices of environmental interpretation took those early first looks at it, they found that there was this pretty strong divide between interpreters who naturally sort of just kind of loosely outlined what they were going to talk about versus those who preferred to have everything sort of neatly ordered, fully scripted out, sort of a word for word, stand and deliver this talk kind of a thing. And out of that sort of bifurcation, of that split or that sorting or that categorization of different styles of interpreters at that time, back in the mid 20th century, 50, 60 years ago, the observation was that the folks who followed a script tended to be less successful in terms of like visitor engagement, interest level, kind of enthusiastic response, that sort of a thing. And they tended to, when distracted or flustered or anything deviated from the script, like if they were leading a guided hike and there was a big tree down partway along the trail that made the rest of the trail inaccessible or unsafe for your, least mobile visitor, they were kind of out of luck for that hike. They kind of turned around and said, well, I guess that's our hike for today because I can't run the rest of this script, and it's legitimately stressful and difficult to mentally rewrite a script as you're speaking it. So, from that early observation, eventually the state of the art was to move into this very recognizable 5-part outline. How many of you guys have been trained to write 3-part essays? Introduction, argument, conclusion. This is literally that. But you're not writing sentences. Never write sentences. And at the front of that, we're going to put sort of we'll call it for this class, kind of the pregame show. And then afterwards, the after action, or the wrap-up, or the post-engagement. Okay. So, I'm going to use pregame as a technical term here all semester long. This is not the pregaming that you're used to, perhaps, as enthusiastic tailgaters. All right. The introduction is exactly what you think it is. Content as well. We'll spend a big chunk of the semester filling out and practicing lots of different techniques for appropriately and effectively engaging with different kinds of content, right? From there, so we'll wrap things up. Just as much with the sort of the visible, the obvious parts of staffed interpretation and non-staffed interpretation, both of which follow that 5-part outline, generally speaking, there's a lot of specific things to be accomplished but that are more invisible, but in some ways more important for you as the interpreter than it is for the interpreted to. So we'll get into a little bit more on this as we go. We've started to practice the introduction a bit as with Monday's class. It went pretty well. I hope you guys felt pretty okay with being able to stand and deliver to your classmates and not feel super awkward or weird about it. In my mind, that went very well, regardless of how it might feel for you. The content, conclusion, pretty straightforward, and then some, we might call it aftercare, or for those of you who really hate public speaking, harm reduction. Okay. The non-staffed interpretation also follows this approach, but in a slightly different way. So, with an interpretive board game, for example, we certainly have what we would map onto the introduction. What is the box art? What's the theme of the interpretation? What's kind of the heart, the core, the most important chunk of what you want to get across and engage with people on? We put that right on the box. You don't even have to open the box to understand what this experience interpretively is going to be all about. And the content is the playing of the game. The conclusion is we've reached the victory condition of the game. Now what do we say? What do we have our players do in sort of the wrap-up? It's not just bagging up the tokens and so forth, folding up the board and putting it back in the box on the shelf. It is more things like in outdoor rec, we might call it a debrief. So what did we learn from this? What was surprising about this? What was frustrating about this? We can design things to be, in a sane and healthy and appropriate way, a little bit frustrating if that's an important part of the message, an important part of the theme of the interpretation. So, the post experience is more of an invitation, maybe again on the back of the box or at the end of the rule book or in an online interpretive experience, a link back to the organization website or a more information section where folks who are really excited about the topic can drill down further and maybe connect with other enthusiasts about that topic and so forth. So, non-staffed and staffed interpretation both have to lean into all 5 parts of this in order to be effective. And for you as a professional interpreter, that pregame and the post experience, before and after sections of the outline are going to contain a whole bunch of sort of mental, that is cognitive, content preparation, physical and emotional preparation, and site preparation so that you are ready and you are ready to make the experience safe and enjoyable and highly effective for your participants. In the post phase, we're typically doing things like program evaluation. So part of that can be asking, as wild and as crazy and maybe intimidating as it sounds, hey guys and gals and everybody, let me know what you thought about today's cave tour or our adventure trek through the forests of Southern Illinois or whatever the experience is. What are a couple of things that went really well that I should make sure that I continue to do? What's maybe one thing that didn't really go so well this time that we have some control over and I can help make that excellent for the next group of folks? And when we sort of regularize, when we make it a part of the regimen to collect that information, the overwhelming majority of that feedback is going to be really positive and encouraging, right? You're not a boring professor. You're not somebody who is exercising authority over people. You are inviting folks into a really cool and exciting new space, maybe that some of them are, up to this point, unfamiliar with. So, that feedback tends to be really, really positive and excellent. And when you do get a bit of constructive feedback, something to change or improve for next time, generally speaking, because you are asking for that feedback, folks will try to give it to you in a way that is, not gonna rip your soul out through your mouth and scar you for life. Generally speaking. There's always one, right? But that's okay. That is okay. You can have some professional distance from stressful input. All right, so any questions on this? We've got different ways of delivering this. We're always going to be, at least in this class, until we can professionally break these rules, doing these things. So, unless you have an eidetic memory, let's commit this to paper. Let's get this down in your notes as a very, very, very bare bones template. Okay? So for each of these 5 stages of your interpretation, leave lots of space, maybe even one whole page, and record them in that order. And we'll fill in some notes on each of these sections, kind of as we go through these next couple of weeks. Okay? So, stage 1, stage 2, introduction, 3, content, 4, conclusion, 5, post-experience. One of these, maybe 2, if you're a very tiny writer, per page for your notes. Okay? A little bit later on our course website, we'll have access to templated files which have this and a whole bunch of the other kind of subheadings that organize neatly into each of these so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And when we're designing various interpretive experiences as practice in this class, you can essentially fill in those blanks and not have to ever face a blank page, which can be stressful for some. Now that writer's block, right? We never have to start there with this. Okay. All right. So in your notes, let's flip to that 3rd page or 3rd section. Excuse me, the 2nd section. I'm going to talk about just one part of the introduction first because it's the most important throughout. And we've already mentioned it. That's the theme. Okay. Take a picture for your classmates so they can see this on the course website eventually. Has everybody got these things loaded up? Okay. Good. So we've already practiced the introducing yourself part of the introduction, but the even more important thing than introducing yourself to the group in a staffed or non-staffed way is to introduce what this interpretive experience is going to be about. And I'm using deliberately very broad terms like experience, because again, this can be staffed, it can be not staffed, and within either of those, there are dozens of different ways to deliver content, different formats. Okay? So, the theme is the most important thing. If we want to wrap a metaphor around it, we could say this is the beating heart of your interpretation. Without the theme, you've got a bunch of body parts, and they're all dead. For this class, we're going to adopt a very specific formula for the theme to make it easier for everybody to help produce higher quality themes at the outset. Okay? So, the first criterion is that your theme statement needs to be more than a topic. A topic is a noun. A person, place, thing, time period, concept, phenomenon, whatever it is. Okay? Your list of 7 things that you're really pretty passionate about that we wrote the other day as one of our first class assignments, those are topics. And you feel very strongly about them, but on that list, to anybody else, they're just nouns. And nouns, for anybody who's ever read a textbook before, textbooks are chock full of nouns. Fact. Textbooks are generally pretty boring. So your theme if everything about your interpretation is furnished around the theme to help bring it alive, to help make it less intimidating or more accessible to your participants, your readers, your visitors, if it's just a fact of a thing's existence, super boring. So, one great way to take your topic, the theme, is first to narrow it down. So, to make your theme and your interpretation more vital, more dynamic, more engaging than just talking about a bunch of facts about a topic, like a textbook does. We turn it into a sentence. One sentence. And this is going to be deceptively difficult to do. We can all write sentences, but it takes some work. It takes some input and it takes some long thought. This is deep work, as it's called. This is not just something you sort of vomit out onto a sheet of paper and hand into your interp supervisor. Put some elbow grease, metaphorically, into it. Okay? So, a sentence has a subject plus an action verb maybe plus a direct object and maybe plus an indirect object. Alright, so if you think back to 3rd grade grammar class, the direct object is the thing to which the verb is done. The indirect object is the thing that the verb does to the direct object, right? So if I give Nash my lunch money because he's threatening to beat me up on the playground, shakedown old school style, Nash is my direct object and the lunch money is the indirect object. Sound good? Okay. The reason that we are making this sentence, not a topic sentence like you're trained to write in essays, but a theme sentence, the reason we're making it an action verb is because the 22 verbs of existence, the passive voice verbs, is the language, those are the language, that textbooks and scientific journal articles are written in. Those 22 passive voice verbs drive up your word count. So it's more that people have to figure out. They do not imply any motion, sequence, action. They are verbs of existence. Okay? So, those 22 verbs are, you ready for it? Be, am, is, are, was, were, been, have, has, had, do, does, did, can, could, will, would, shall, should, may, might, and must. All right? One more time. Let's write these down again in your notes for this intro section. But we're going to take a pass through your outline once the outline is written to make sure that these to-be verbs, am, is, are, was, were, been, etc., are not anywhere else in the document either. But they're especially killer in your theme statement. So if you say X is Y, be, am, is the third passive voice verb in that list. It's just a statement of fact. That's boring. It doesn't communicate any value. It doesn't communicate any importance. It's not intriguing. It's just stating that X is Y. Okay? So, our list of 22 helping verbs that we're going to filter out, we're going to search for in our content as we're developing it, and remove them are be, am, is, are, was, were, been, have, has, had, do, will, would, shall, should. And then finally, may, might, must. Every language has this set of verbs as concepts. These are part of the irreducible closed set, as it's called, of verb type communication. You cannot remove them from a language, otherwise there's a big gaping functional hole in that language. However, these are not doing any favors to us as interpreters. Be, am, is, are, was, were, been, have, has, had, do, does, did, can, could, will, would, shall, should, may, might, or must. We're going to commit this to memory this semester. And we're going to start to see these everywhere. And we're going to condition our bodies in class. Whenever your professor uses any one of these, you're going to slump down in your chair a little bit more, get a little bit more heavy-lidded, because that professor is wasting your life by low-value information transfer without communicating things like action, sequence, meaning, value, importance, controversy, ethic, etc. Okay? Cool. Onward. All right, so we are in the process of making a sentence. We have a clear subject with an action verb, maybe, maybe not, typically, a direct object and or indirect object. We typically only have indirect objects if we have a direct object. And in addition, I'm going to add a couple of other parts to this make sentence effort in transforming your topic to something more specific. So, we are going to specify the topic very carefully. So if we are in our own heads thinking about what's the forest ecosystem on the Shawnee, that kind of makes sense as an interpretive topic, you know? Have somebody, family on the Shawnee at the visitor center, and you go spend the day hiking around, and they want to know a little bit more about the trees they're going to be walking around and so forth. So our topic is the forest ecosystem. There's no verb there. It's not a sentence. And, you know, it's not real exciting. And also, in our process of specifying, we're going to remove jargon. This theme statement has to be accessible to everybody. That means about a 6th grade reading level in America. Okay? I am sorry that the education system has failed most of us, but it is the context in which we are working. So, 6th grade reading level, not real high, like a newspaper. And so, words like ecosystem mean a lot to you and me, but we're college-educated nerds. So an ecosystem doesn't mean anything to a whole lot of people. Like, more than 100 million Americans don't really have any strong concept of what an ecosystem is. And for us, the concept of an ecosystem is like semester 1, week 1 kind of stuff. Maybe even high school biology, maybe even junior high if you have a cool science teacher back then. Okay? So we're going to specify, but we're not going to do it in ways that use any domain-specific language, period. At least not in the theme statement. Now, we can get into some jargon. We can build an entire game about figuring out what the word ecosystem even means. That could be a pretty fun game. But we're going to spend a bunch of time to specify that term. And we're going to spend that time on that term if it's super important, and we are not going to otherwise. Okay? So, we also, in our sentence making, generally want to try to use attributes attributional language. Talked about attributional language earlier. That is language that includes some sense of assignment to human people. Words like you, or we, or I, or us. Relatively rarely do we use the word them. Okay? And here's why. Attributional for you or we, but not them, because in this first sentence, we are really loading this first sentence with a lot of stuff, aren't we? In this very first sentence, we have to situate the topic in relation to the person that is receiving this theme. Okay? Not kind of a blog post on how comets killed the dinosaurs, which is a past tense, active verb construction with a direct object, right? Comet kills dinosaurs. We don't care about that. That's just a factoid. It's a pretty well substantiated one. It's interesting to think about. Like, what was it like to be eating a bunch of Cretaceous cycads and stuff like giant tree-sized ferns as a long-necked sauropod, and then you see this flash of white. It's so bright you can like see the next sauropod's skeleton through its 3-foot-thick neck, and you think, huh, that's weird in your little lizard brain before the shockwave vaporizes both of you, right? Those are action verbs. That's exciting. But that still doesn't have any connection or relation or sense of importance or relevance to the person that you're interpreting to. So, we always want to include some sense of positioning, relationship, connection in this first sentence. What does the wipe out of the dinosaurs mean for us today? Would be a one sort of not great example of using attribution. The word us in that sentence. So now we're not thinking about dinosaurs, placidly eating cycads. We're thinking, what if asteroid Ruaomoku, spirals in to hit us? NASA is tracking lots of asteroids that have a better than 1 in 1,000 chance. So like 0.1% chance of colliding with the Earth. That would be a humanity-ending event, like it was for the dinosaurs, or certain stages of the dinosaurs. Okay? So we want people thinking about, how does this impact me? Or answering the question, why should I care? Because as the interpreter, you're competing with a lot of things. First, the phone in everybody's pocket. Second, the fact that everybody just got to your visitor center. They all need to go to the bathroom. The kids are having a meltdown because they ate too much fruit by the foot. I don't know if that's even still a thing, but yeah, okay. And they're just totally sugared out. They're either ricocheting off the walls or they're in like that insulin, coma afterwards. And, mom and dad had some intense fellowship quietly on the drive over because, there's some tension there. Like, you're competing to break through all of that and say, hey, there are some really important things that I'd love to engage with you all on. And I know you came all this way. Let's do this. And I'm not going to put you to sleep with a college-level lecture on paleontology. I'm going to talk about this in relationship to where you're at. Like right now today. These are some easy dots to connect. Okay? If we can't figure this part out, then there's no sense in spending lots and lots of time and effort on geeking out on sort of the finer contours and texture of your topic, hopefully one that you're super passionate about. So we want to make sure that this is something that matters to other folks, like a lot of other folks, like maybe almost everybody other folks. And generally we can find that angle. There's something in the human experience that's important about almost any topic. That's where we need to go. So when I say in this class all semester long that interpretation starts with the facts, but it never stays there, that's what I'm referring to. We're looking for that angle, that connection, that relationship. Okay? And secondarily to that, we want to make sure that we are provoking on purpose to help folks understand in our first sentence with our hot take or our spiciness that this is worth paying attention to. Okay? This is you signaling that you've taken this experience off of autopilot, and this is going to be an experience. We are going somewhere with this today. We're not just filling time, because your time is way too precious to just be filling your time or anybody else's time, right? That's an irreplaceable gift when folks decide to spend even a half an hour with you. They're never going to get that half an hour back. So we want to, if not provoke, at least have a clear perspective on the issue. Okay? Cool. All right, so let's run back through and make sure we're tracking on all of these. We're talking about taking a noun, which is a word or phrase that is a concrete or conceptual thing, and turning that noun, let's say phrase, usually is, into a full and complete sentence. So we'll get to stuff like punctuation. We're going to be punctuating this sentence very intentionally. That's possibly the nerdiest thing I've said today and maybe all week. We're going to intentionally punctuate this sentence. Wow, what a class. All right? And in making this a sentence, we're going to use the standard format. We're not going to use a convoluted sentence structure with a whole bunch of dependent clauses and therefores and so forth, because a lot of people have a 6th grade reading level. We're going to respect that 6th grade reading level by removing technical terminology or domain-specific language, and we're going to be much more specific than the general topic. So we use the structure general topic, 2-3 word noun phrase that you kind of want to build an experience around. What's the meso-level context around that topic? And what's the more specific topic that is typically a much longer phrase, or you might think about the specific thing that you want to talk about in terms of a mental sort of paragraph. We're going to boil it down into one sentence of the following form, especially using an action verb. Whether or not you have a direct object and or an indirect object, you need to have an action verb for the purposes of this class. We're going to bake in some kind of sense of relation or connection using explicit attributional language. Words like you or we or us. And we're going to have a meaningful perspective on it. It can be a controversial perspective on it. It can be deliberately provocative. It can't be offensive, obviously. But there's nothing wrong with kind of poking people just a little bit to help all of us see something maybe that we're taking for granted, or something that we've layered a lot of assumptions on that might have been even true at some point, but maybe things have shifted a little bit. Okay? Cool. All right. Any questions on these so far? Cool. Let's get after that punctuation, because the punctuation comes after the content. So, in this class, we want to think real long and hard about how we can build a provocative, or at least a perspective-taking sentence as our theme around which we're going to build everything else. Everything hangs off of this, metaphorically. So we want to think about the wonderfully mundane period, or full stop, as they say across the empire. The period is kind of like the Corolla, like the inoffensive light four-door sedan of punctuation marks. The interrogative mark, question mark, that's an invitation. When you're asked a question, preconsciously, your brain has to answer that question. Now, whether or not you decide to open your mouth and respond, totally different thing. But marketers have known for a long time that you and I, and everybody, literally cannot resist thinking about a question and thinking about some kind of an answer. Okay? Now, later on in the semester, we'll talk through about a dozen different kinds of questions that you can use in the content of your interpretive experience or non-staff thing in order to spark different kinds of thinking or different kinds of interaction among folks. Things like directing questions. Does everybody see where I'm writing this over here? It's a directing question. Okay? And so on and so forth. So, you can use a period if you want your interpretation to have kind of that safe, familiar, sort of inoffensive Corolla feel to it. You could use a question mark if you want to draw people in. If they don't know the answer, they're probably going to bet they're going to get an answer to this interesting, maybe even provocative question by engaging with your interpretation, going on your guided hike, or reading the book that you've put together to explore this thing. Okay? You can use an exclamation point because you're talking about things that are important, not just things that are factually true. And sometimes the exclamation point is the appropriate emphasis marker for something that's really pretty important. Okay? So, in our future exercises where we're writing theme statements about various topics important to each of us, if they're all periods, that's not wrong. You know, it's like the minimum required flair in office space. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. But you can kick it up a notch, as celebrity chef Emeril Lagasse used to say. Okay? So, we want to punctuate. Intentionally. And if you're really kind of the person that your significant other told you not to worry about, you could use the interrobang. That's right. You could crossbreed the question mark with the exclamation point, and from that unholy union, punctuate professional interpretation's most important statement with an interrobang. Okay? Now, this is decidedly a less formal approach. That's not wrong. If you need to signal, because it is important to for whatever reason, with your particular chosen topic and relative to the audience or the participation group that you have assembled for this thing, if that's appropriate, do it. If it's appropriate to put an emoji in your theme statement to signal specific things to an audience, and it's, you know, professional and ethical and appropriate to do that, then do it. Okay? This may be one of the only classes you ever take at SIU that is giving you the green light on emoji to help convey specific things. Because a lot of people understand very quickly and compactly through the use of a single character what you are trying to express. Now, some folks really kind of struggle with emoji, and they might be a little bit off-put by it. Maybe it's a little bit too casual for some audiences. That's fine too, right? They're allowed to feel how they feel. But the point is, punctuate intentionally. Everything from the absolutely milquetoast and acceptable period all the way up to, okay, maybe not the eggplant emoji, you know, the peaches emoji, or any of those that have specific connotations involved beyond their denotation, which is their dictionary definition or meaning. Yeah, that's okay. All right. Any questions about these? Okay, cool. Let's take our 3-minute break here. It's about 1:45-ish. Get up, move your body, change your posture. Go get some water. Go get some cold water. All right, do your thing. Come back in 3 minutes and resume with our next exercise. Go ahead and pull out a fresh sheet of paper. We're going to do this as an exercise, and you can use whatever topics you would like. So, something off of that list of 7 things that are genuinely important to you, or something else. If you're not super sure you want to deploy any of those to class yet, that's fine. Of course, you can talk about any particular topic, maybe relative to student teaching you're about to do starting next week, or the content that you're about to student teach, or something with outdoor rec, or whatever your particular subdiscipline within your major happens to be. You can pick a topic out of that. You can pick a place, a site, location, an ecosystem. Think about it as a specific time period, or maybe across a range of time periods, and you can construct sort of a narrative out of those for your interpretive content. But for this exercise, we're basically going to write 4 things 3 times. All right? First thing, so first subpart of theme number 1, what's your general topic? That 1-word noun or 2-3-word noun phrase. For a forestry student, it might be something like, I want to build some interpretation around maple trees. Maple trees, noun phrase. And then second, on a separate line underneath that, narrow that down. Specify that a little bit. Are you really talking about all maple trees, or did you really mean, okay, so I'm at Southern Illinois University in the forestry department, so I'm going to talk about the specific maple species that we find around here. Maybe native and non-native maple trees of Southern Illinois. We'd call that like a mesotopic. Still not a sentence. It's a little bit more specified. Okay? And as you think about your mesotopic and write that down under your general topic, start thinking about, okay, I could talk about a million different things, even just with non-native and native maples of Southern Illinois. Am I talking about human uses of, past historic cultural uses of, cultural significance of to indigenous folks? Am I talking about ecosystem dynamics? What about those non-native maples? Are they aggressively invasive, or are they just kind of here? So we're drilling down into a specific topic. What's a much more specific, narrow topic? And with your specific topic, start thinking about, this is a good spot to start thinking about, what's my perspective on this? Or you might say it as, what's the value proposition of this more specific topic? Or what's my evaluation of it? What is the value coming out of evaluation? Coming out of this much more specific thing. Okay? it's okay if you need to take a second to kind of think about this for a second. This isn't something that we've maybe done in the past a whole lot. We're not writing academic essays here. We're trying to connect with people. Building a bridge to them metaphorically. So with your more specific topic, start adding in that angle or perspective or Gen Z or Gen A take. Etc. How do you want to come at this topic? What's a way that might be very familiar with folks or surprising to folks? So for non-native and invasive species, we could take the perspective that the invasive species are colonizers, or that invasive species are winning a quiet war on the familiar faces around our landscape. The faces being the aspect of various native trees nearby. Okay? So what's a much more specific topic? Before we get into transforming your specified topic with sort of a nascent or a newborn angle on that, let's just kind of pause and go around the room here. And here for folks, what's a general topic? How did you specify that into a meso topic? How did you really narrow it down into something that you can really work with? If you only have like 20 minutes with people, you really work something more specific. If it's super general, man, you're going to be trying to ram 6 gallons of BS into a 5-gallon bucket of your time. Okay? So, let's head around the room. Anybody? General topic. Volleyball. I like it. Okay, anybody else?
Management of pine.
Pine management. I like it. What else?
So rocks.
Rocks. Nice. Get it?
Wood barrels.
Wood barrels. Okay. Yeah.
I said crochet.
Crochet. My wife really likes to crochet. Yeah. Anybody else?
But climbing.
Climbing. Excellent. What you got?
Kayaking.
Kayaking. Man, see, these are interesting topics, right? Some of them are like pastime kinds of things, or have like long cultural heritages. Others more technical, but probably pretty important to think about, even with a general audience who are not going to be working in forestry. Okay? Any volunteers on meso topics? How did you specify climbing or kayaking or crocheting or volleyball or rocks or pine management?
I kind of broke mine down into like defense or offense, what we wanted to work on, so I put defense.
Okay.
And then like to even more specify it, like a specific topic, I put passing.
All right. So defensive passing in volleyball. Anybody else? Nice work.
I like specified it by like rocks and minerals of the Midwest.
Okay.
But I also thought about doing like pick like a specific type of rock that has a lot of variations. So like agate, for example, there's a bunch of different types of agate.
Yes.
And we could talk about that.
Okay. Bunch of different kinds of agate. Very cool. Anybody else? Meso topic. Just kind of narrowing down a little bit more, or a lot more in some of these cases so far.
Benefits of eastern white pine.
Benefits of eastern white pine. Okay? So we're building a case for values. We're not just talking about the facts of eastern pines, but we're seeing how people ascribe importance to certain things. Cool. This can, even for a somewhat more technical topic like timber and non-timber uses of a particular tree species, right? We can come to appreciate things like toilet paper. When was the last time you really appreciated the people who produce your toilet paper? COVID, right? Or maybe you're a part of the elite B-Day master race and you're not so worried about toilet paper as much anymore. And now toilet paper is kind of a happy thought for you because it's like, man, I have been freed of the shackles of smearing things around myself. Whatever. Cool. All right, anybody on a specific topic, like laser pinpoint subset of the thousands of things you could talk about from your general topic?
Management for environmental benefits of eastern white pine.
Managing for the benefits of eastern white pine. Okay. Anybody else? Good.
So like the best rocks to hunt for in the Midwest.
Okay.
And the practices to do so.
All right. So words like good, better, best, those are value words, right? Somebody is evaluating. This rock is trash tier. This rock is S rank. Okay. Good. Very good. So, let's hold a little bit of space now for what you've just done. And we want to do this explicitly at this point, especially on our first couple of tries at this, because we are fighting against, we are economizing ourselves against what's called decision fatigue. Show of hands, anybody ever heard of decision fatigue before? Okay. So, cognitive science researchers, people who study and do research and lots of lab and out of the lab testing on figuring out what are the electrical processes, what are the biological and molecular biochemical processes of how we form thought. They've identified that, A, your brain uses about a third of your blood sugar. Okay? So when you're doing thought work, like writing stuff, or writing computer code, or playing League of Legends until 4 a.m., or whatever it is, and your body's not active, your brain is still using a third of what your body produces as energy, if you want to think of it in terms of a blood glucose budget. So, decision fatigue is a function of your brain as a finite biological processor, contrast resolution engine, decision-making engine, risk evaluation system. You are literally spending molecules to run your brain to decide what not to talk about in these. And that's a lot of decisions. Picking something out of a vast sea of thousands of subtopics on maple, or agates, or rock climbing, or kayaking, crocheting, volleyball, etc. You've just done that. And you did it 3 times in a row. That's a lot of decisions. Whether or not it really felt like it, your brain has done an absolutely crazy amount of work. So, if your brain is a $4,000 battle station gaming rig, your RTX 4090 just spun up to like 2 kilowatts and all of the fans in your computer were going at full speed. Your brain sounds like a little jet engine and we can hear the whistling sounds at your ears. Okay? So, we want to acknowledge this because when you're trying to do this and you're not aware of things like decision fatigue and you're not using techniques to simplify and lower the thought cost, the cognitive load of saying no to thousands of things, you can get exhausted and kind of burned out pretty quick without really meaning to, without really thinking about it. Okay? So, we're going to use frameworks like this to narrow down and specify and not reinvent the wheel and figure out how to make these decisions afresh for every person. Okay? If this doesn't work for you, if you're not a whole to part kind of thinker, you're a part to whole thinker, where you started with something that was super specific and then sort of belatedly thought about, yeah, well, there's other stuff I could talk about too. That's okay too. Okay? That is okay. And if that's how your brain works in this class, that's fine. Let me know. And I will evaluate you on using this particular workflow. With all of that said, Let's see if we can write, just in our last 7 minutes of class here, write one first draft. One sentence. 7 minutes. That checks all of those 6 or 7 or 8 different criteria for that theme sentence we laid out. Okay? We'll share these right at the end here and head out for the day. If you're writing in pen, write like triple space so you can cross things out, you can reword quite a bit. I want to give you lots of space to do that because it's frustrating to have to start over once you run out of space. Okay, not wrong for using pen. Just give yourself lots and lots of space. This is a first draft. We could also call it a 0th draft if that makes it more defanged. Less stressful. So we're about 3 minutes in. You have more time to keep on writing if you would like. Very commonly at this stage, one or a couple of folks around the room will get, most of the way through and kind of glide to a halt on a couple different options you could take to sort of finish out the sentence. That's normal. And we're going to deliberately sort of flip the structure of the challenge response format that we're used to, where the professor says, all right, you do this thing, and then you do that thing. We're going to make this a little bit more collaborative. So, is anybody not 100% across the finish line? Would you like to tap into the formidable array of brains in the room with you? In helping each other, you will learn how to do this better for yourself. So, would anyone like to nominate one that's like partially there, but you know, it's definitely almost draft one? It's okay if not. It's okay if so.
I don't think my vocabulary is going to be the right zone, if that makes sense. But
Okay.
I have best management practices for maximizing environmental benefits of eastern white pine.
Okay. What is the subject of that sentence? Best practices for management of white pine in southern Illinois was the statement?
Yeah, pretty much.
All right. What's the subject?
Management of white pine. Well, I guess the subject would be white pine.
Okay. What's the verb? What's the predicate of the sentence? Everything that's not the subject.
Management practices.
Management practices is a noun phrase. Okay, so we've got what's called a complex subject, where we have prepositions like of that extends that noun phrase of the subject of the sentence a couple more words. So best practices of managing white pines in southern Illinois. Okay, so 2 prepositional phrases and best management practices as the subject phrase. So all that to say, we have a complex subject and no verb. But we do have a perspective, a take on it, a value judgment. Best management practices. Okay? So, we could add something like, how we get the best value out of our white pines here in southern Illinois. Here is also an attributional language word. Okay. One way to know if it's a correct and grammatically complete sentence is to ask what punctuation goes at the end of a statement. Is that a how we get best practices out of our white